Speaking of reliability, a podcast with good friends talking with you about reliability engineering topics.
Welcome to Speaking of Reliability. This is Carl Carlson.
And this is Fred Schenkelberg. Hey, Carl.
Hey, Fred. I've got a interesting question from a reader. And of course, I get lots of questions that relate to FMEA.
Mm-hmm.
This one challenged me for a minute. It set me back as I took a look at it to see if it was possible. This reader was interested on whether or not you could have one analysis that combines FMEA and Hazard Analysis, or HAZOP. And rather than do them separately, whether you could do one. And I thought about that, and I thought, well, that's an interesting subject for a podcast. I know I've written an article that's available on Ascendo called FMEA and HAZOP, but that basically explains what each one is and how they're different and when you use one and when you use the other. In this case, the reader or the listener was very familiar with both tools and asked if they could be done simultaneously in essentially one spreadsheet or one database. And that was the subject of the question.
Well, my very first thought is right at the start of either of those processes is assemble a team. And I'm probably relatively confident that in most organizations, it would be a very similar, if not identical, team of people that would approach both of those. There might be a swap out here or there, but depending on which FMEA you're doing, I imagine, but a systems FMEA or design FMEA and a HAZOP, which still need design people and people familiar with the use conditions and use profiles, and maybe a safety or a quality type person, or it would be a very similar team. So I can see where the logic is that if you're going to put the same people in the same room, why not just do both? But then I break down with my understanding of the two processes is they have really different focuses. It'd be like trying to do a system FMEA and a process FMEA at the same time.
Yeah, no, okay. Interesting way you approached it there, Fred. So let's talk first. I want to comment about the team. Mm-hmm. And you're absolutely correct. There's a similarity in team. The difference is on the safety side, on the HAZOP, you may have a representative from the safety community or even a regulatory representative that understands the regulatory risk that is different than you have in the design FMEA. So there might be.
That makes me think though, Carl, have you ever done an FMEA where you brought in a lawyer to be on the team?
No.
I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't recommend it. It's just bashing on lawyers here.
It's a great question, and I've just searched my mental database, and absolutely no. I don't think that's necessarily a good idea either. So I'm going to say no to that one. Okay. There is some overlap between these procedures. So let me just muse on it for a minute. I've worked with probably a dozen different medical device companies. Some of them very big, well-known, some of them smaller. And most medical device companies have an FMEA process, and they also have a hazard analysis process, and they're in different departments. And we've wrestled with this subject. And so in some companies, they'll do the design FMEA, then they'll send that spreadsheet or database to the HAZOP department, which might be inside the regulatory or safety department, and they will take on a lot of the function, the failure modes, the initial effects, but they'll work on the effect column, and they'll understand what the cause is, but their actions might be different, and the risk assessment is different on HAZOP.
Yeah,
and there is a significant difference in how they approach risk. So that has to be dealt with. But there is some overlap because the failure modes are going to be similar. So it's interesting. I think you could have a database that has both information, but the columns are going to be a little bit, or the fields are going to be a little bit different, and the risk assessment is going to be different.
Well, in that scenario, and that's kind of where I was thinking too, is that I brainstorming what could go wrong. Even that has a slight difference. Although in medical device companies, the teams I've worked with tend to focus on what could harm the patient, even in a design FMEA. Those tend to be the higher severity things and things that get more attention in the design FMEA. But they tend to look at it through a not as strong of a lens, I would say, on that regard. Where a HAZOP is, well, if it has no impact on the patient, then it doesn't belong in the HAZOP. If it weighs an extra 10 ounces, then the spec says, well, yeah, technically that's a failure in the strictest sense of quality assurance, yet it's sitting on a shelf, customer didn't care.
So you have the scope in an FMEA will include performance as well as safety issues. You typically all lump together any types of functions, all types of important primary functions are in the FMEA.
Right.
Whereas the HAZOP is going to focus strictly on safety. So if it's medical, it'd be patient safety or safety scope. And so that's a limiter in terms of scope. But even imagine a medical device equipment, some type of blood pressure equipment, and there's the performance of it. Like, is it very clear in terms of the doctor can read it easily? Does it last? Is it durable? Does it have the right features, and do the features work? Then there's the safety side, which is if you have a failure that can have a consequence of a wrong reading, that could be bad.
Or it doesn't deflate. You pinched off the circulation to somebody's arm, but it won't deflate it. That would be bad.
Exactly. And so those where you have the consequence being safety related, but if you haven't done a good FMEA, you may not know all of the different potential hazards. So I like to do an FMEA first as input, and then you take the ones that have the consequence that's safety related and then bring them into a hazard analysis. The risk in an FMEA is a bit different, particularly the occurrence rating. The occurrence rating is the likelihood of the failure mode and associated cause in an FMEA, but in a hazard analysis, you look at severity and occurrence/probability, but the occurrence there is the likelihood of the bad event.
Right.
And so those are calculated differently or assessed differently. So if you're smart enough to know both sides of it, you can really have some type of integration of one flows into the other and flows back. But you don't want to combine them totally because they have different scopes. And like I say, there's different people that might be involved.
I hate to say it. I suspect a really gifted facilitator could probably pull that off, especially if it's really a big overlap of the teams. Yeah. Yet I think it makes it, because of the different focus of the two different activities, it makes sense to say, all right, we're going to focus on the design FMEA and we're going to tag the ones that are safety related. One, in the design, we got to deal with it anyway. Yeah, let's run it through. Let's all take a break, go outside, go get some coffee, come back in. And now we're doing the HAZOP. We're doing the hazard analysis. Yeah. The focus now is this. All right, let's start with what we already identified and look at it this way. All right. And then we pick up a handful of other things and they're going, okay, let's take another break, come back in, right? This is design FMEA time. Let's use this Wall's charts over here and let's add those things we just discovered during the hazard analysis. I really think it's beneficial to physically have separate meetings or separate, break it up. So it's very different because, as you know, is that even going from failure mode to failure mechanism is confusing enough in any kind of FMEA or HAZOP. And just and then adding another where you're flipping from a green activity to a purple activity, if you're going back and forth between the two of them, that will confuse that group in my mind with unless
You're
you're
right, Fred. So the physical separation of time, like we have a different time for the meeting. Uh, you have different rules that go into the analysis is important because you don't want to commingle too much here. And the other point I'll make is that a mistake in a HAZOP can be so serious, like a medical company can be put out of business by regulatory mistakes and safety mistakes, that the company oversight of the HAZOP becomes different. And so the highlighting of the risk in HAZOP will have reviews at management level to ensure that everything is being addressed properly. And those are going to be separate or different from the reviews of the FMEA. And maybe that shouldn't be that way, but it is that way because of how serious the potential errors are.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. Maybe I've worked with, I have had some companies that are absolutely almost completely driven by the HAZOP and absolutely terribly paranoid about how something's phrased. It's just scrutinized to the nth degree to where it's more a legal document than it is anything to actually help the organization improve their design. And it's, do we put that in there? Do we track that? Do we do this? It was where the period was. And it was amazing. And it had nothing to do with actually making a better product. It was all about, will it get through regulatory muster? And other organizations going, it's just one of the other tools to help us understand where the priorities are. And they treated it very much as a screwdriver or a wrench on the bench. And let's look at it this way, and we'll see different things than when we look at it with the fault tree analysis, for example. We see different things. And they looked at it, completely different culture, mind me. And it might be their experience with their particular oversight from the regulatory agencies or their prior experience or lack of experience. I don't know which one is which. But
well, yeah, so you described it well. I don't particularly like the idea of doing an analysis to pass regulatory muster as the only purpose. In other words, yes, we have to meet regulatory, but at the same time, we can also be improving the design.
Right.
And so I tend to bias towards improving the design so that the resultant design is safe, reliable, and meets regulatory requirements, as opposed to just trying to tease out one of those, such as regulatory.
Yeah.
And I think you miss opportunities there. The other thing I've noticed is that some companies that put too much emphasis on HAZOP and not on FMEA end up not having reliable products. They're not focused on the reliability of the product. They're focused on, does it meet the immediate safety needs?
There's one argument I heard around that is that if we don't get past the regulatory hurdles and HAZOP and addressing those issues and what we identified allows us to get to market. We don't have a product if we don't do that. If it doesn't work, if it doesn't last more than a year or whatever the reliability things, that's a financial risk. It's not a regulatory risk. And I've talked to a couple of regulators, and I know it's changed over the years. It some time ago, it used to be, we don't really check if it's going to work for 5 years under its warranty. That's not our business. Is over that 5 years, will it degrade to such a point that it'll harm a patient, for example? That's what they care about, is not whether it's reliable or not. It actually functions over that time, because they say if it goes cold and it doesn't have an interaction with a patient that could cause harm, then it's not a problem. It just doesn't work. You got to use other methods or find another system or whatever. They said that's truly a business decision, is how reliable your product is.
So let's just state this as clearly and unequivocally as possible. You need both.
I agree.
Yeah, I know you and I agree, but I'm going to state this for the listeners, that what Fred and I are saying is that you want to achieve both. Yes, you need a safe product that meets regulatory, that doesn't have that risk. You also need a highly reliable product that meets the long-term objectives of consumers. And the best companies do both, and they do both very well.
Yeah. No, and we've seen plenty of examples of companies that really, and I was talking to Greg Hutchins a couple of weeks ago about it, and it was, I need to get the product out and make money, and if it doesn't work, I'll fix it later. And I says, well, you might not get another. There's a very good likelihood you won't get another chance to bring the product out again if it doesn't work.
Or it would be so expensive to fix because you've baked in the failure mode, or failure modes plural. It becomes very expensive to fix. Whereas if you can design in reliability, it's much less expensive.
Yeah. So we had heated discussion about the different priorities and stuff like that. And we're like, but it's part of the culture of the organization. It's the previous experience of the folks making decisions. It's their force of will, so to speak.
This becomes very acute on startups because the startup companies need to be successful out the chute. They need to make money right out the chute. They're not necessarily, they should be, I think, but they're not necessarily concerned about the long-term reliability because if their product doesn't make it the first month, then the long-term reliability doesn't matter. So I see the arguments. I'm just staying firm to the view that I've had for years, which is you want to do both, and you want to do both very well.
Yeah. Some industries, like the solar panels, I did a bunch of work with them over the years, is they were very keen on reliability of their products over time. And there wasn't a regulatory oversight to them, right, for the reliability or quality of their product. There was the competitive market. Yet it turns out for a big solar field installation, the banks and investors got involved because the payback for their investment, and it's costs more upfront to put in a solar power plant, for example, or solar field. And the payback is that you don't have to do a lot of maintenance on it, only if the panels actually work over the long term. If they're out there replacing panels, then it was a really bad investment. And so they got prompted by the banks and by their big investors to do these big field installations. And they had to really work out and sort out, well, how do we know it's going to last 20 years? And so there was a market-driven incentive to do that. And I haven't seen that in many other industries. And I have definitely not seen it in regulatory controlled agencies.
Yeah, very interesting. What comes to mind, Fred, and I know we're bumping up against the time for this podcast, but this is so much a subject of reliability planning, because in reliability planning, where you start with the vision, you do a gap analysis, you work on your methods and your decisions. Oftentimes an FMEA and a hazard analysis would show up in the reliability plan. Sometimes just one. Sometimes a fault tree analysis gets added in.
Mm-hmm.
It should all be part of the reliability plan, where you're not just sort of bouncing around what one executive wants versus what somebody else wants. It's part of the analysis of your gaps and your step-by-step plans.
Yep. Well, some things like the hazard analysis, depending on your industry, is maybe a regulatory requirement. And so one, I don't know, is it jujitsu or some other martial arts where you use the momentum of your opponent against them? Is that, well, if we have to do it, let's actually make it useful for us.
Oh, I love that.
And
very often you have to do it. And I agree that making it useful, like hazard analysis, has certain elements to it that are very beneficial that are outside of the scope of FMEA, like trigger event might be hazard analysis. And that thought process is really useful. And so I think they can build back and forth, like you pointed out, the results of the hazard analysis can go back into an FMEA and vice versa.
Yep. well, we can make a good thing out of a regulatory requirement any day. Well, maybe not. Let's not push it too far.
Yeah. Right. That shouldn't be.
Yeah. So I mean, if you're listening to this and going, it's just a checklist item, or it's extremely valuable. What's your take on FMEA, HAZOP, and the interaction, or, any of these kind of regulatory requirement type things? How does your organization deal with that? We'd love to hear it. If you have any questions, even more so, head over to accendoreliability.com/go/SOR. A couple of ways to get in touch. Carl and I and the other hosts of the show are available through LinkedIn and our about pages. So plenty of ways for you to get in touch, and it helped maybe polish your particular internal processes. And Carl was so subtly referring to the book that we published, so you should go pick that up too. The Process of Reliability Engineering. It goes over those steps that he outlined. Shameless plug there at the end of the
what's kind podcast. Of shameless. You're right, but it's worthwhile.
Yeah. Exactly. So, well, thanks, Carl. Interesting question today, and I was like, I never thought of that before doing them together. So, that's why I like the questions we get.
Very much so. All right, Fred. Catch you later.
Cheers. Talk to you soon. Thanks for listening to Speaking of Reliability. We invite you to join the conversation. If you have a question or a topic that you think we should discuss in a future show, please let us know. You can find a comment box below the episode show notes, or just leave a note as part of a review on iTunes.